The sun had barely risen over the quiet lake community when I realized my weekend of peace was about to turn into a battle. I never asked for because when I drove up to my own cabin, the parking space I had paid for and maintained for years was occupied not by one car but by two, and standing nearby with arms crossed like they owned the place was the infamous HOA Karen and her equally entitled mother, and in that instant, I knew I had two choices: back down and let them walk all over me, like they had done to so many neighbors before, or stand my ground and show them that I wasn't just another quiet resident they could push around. So I took a deep breath, gripped my steering wheel, and decided that today they were going to learn the hard way that messing with the wrong person's property can cost a lot more than they ever expected. We're supposed to be a calm weekend escape from the city noise, but the moment I reached my lake cabin and saw both of my legally assigned parking spots taken by HOA Karen's brand new SUV and her mother's dented minivan, I felt the kind of frustration that makes your heart pound, because this wasn't some random understanding. These two had been making life miserable for the entire community for months, constantly issuing fake citations, threatening fines for imaginary rule violations, and acting like the entire neighborhood was their private kingdom. I had bought this cabin with my hard-earned money years ago, paid every single HOA fee on time, and even helped maintain the gravel lot during storms, yet here I was circling around my own property, unable to even unload my things. While they stood by sipping coffee and pretending not to see me when I rolled down my window and politely asked them to move, Karen smirked and said that the HOA had decided my spot was now visitor parking, which was a lie because I had checked the bylaws 100 times before then. Her mother chimed in, telling me I should be grateful. They were even letting me live in what they called their community. That was the breaking point, because if you have ever dealt with an HOA bully, you know they thrive when you stay quiet. So I parked temporarily on the grass, grabbed my phone, and called the towing company I had on speed dial from the last time someone tried to pull this stunt with me while waiting. I kept my camera recording because with people like them you need proof, and I could see them start to panic when I said clearly, so that the audio picked up, "You are trespassing on my private property, and your vehicles are about to be removed at your expense, by the way." Where are you watching from right now? Is it a place with strict HOAs, or a small town where neighbors actually respect each other? The towing truck arrived faster than I expected, which only made the tension sharper as the driver hopped out with practiced ease, glanced at my recording phone. I said, "Ma'am, which two vehicles are being removed today?" I pointed directly at Karen's shiny SUV and her mother's faded van, and said, "Those two, they are blocking my private parking spots without permission. I have ownership papers and the HOA bylaws saved if you need them." He nodded and started hooking up the SUV first. That's when Karen ran toward him, waving her arms, shouting, "You can't do this. I'm on the HOA board. This is community property." But the driver didn't even look at her. He just said, "Take it up with the owner. I have the call log, and that's all I need." Her face turned red, and she spun toward me, screeching, "You're going to regret this. Do you even know who I am?" I said, "Yes." "You're the person illegally parked on my land, trying to intimidate me, and I've got the whole thing on video for the sheriff when they show up." She froze for a second because people like her expect fear not facts, while her mother kept yelling about calling her son, who she claimed was a lawyer. I knew their threats were empty. I had been warned by other neighbors that these two loved to bluff their way into control, and most residents just avoided confrontation to keep the peace. But I was past that point. I had spent too many weekends trapped in their ridiculous power games now. The SUV was halfway onto the tow truck, and Karen was practically dancing in rage, trying to block the ramp, threatening lawsuits, screaming about damages, and swearing she would have my cabin condemned. And said, "Lady, unless you want to be on this truck, to step aside." At that moment, several neighbors peeked out from their cabins, some recording on their phones, some whispering things like, "Finally, someone stood up to them." It was strange to see the same people who once kept their heads down now quietly cheering because they had all been bullied too, as the first car was secured. I turned to the group and asked, "Has anyone else had them take your spots before? I'm curious where you all are from. Do your neighborhoods deal with this kind of drama? Or are you lucky enough to have places where people mind their own business?" As the second tow truck hook clamped onto the old minivan, Karen's mother started screaming louder than her daughter. claiming she had heart problems and that moving her car was putting her life in danger yet. Even while shouting, she tried to climb into the driver's seat and lock the doors. The tow operator sighed, clearly used to dramatic scenes, and told her, "If you don't step out, I'll have to call law enforcement for trespassing and obstruction." She froze for a second, muttered some insults under her breath, and finally backed away, glaring at me like I had just stolen her entire house instead of reclaiming my own parking space. While this was happening, more neighbors had gathered, watching from a safe distance, some even laughing quietly because for years everyone had been afraid to challenge Karen and her mother, who ruled the HOA with intimidation, fake fines, and endless complaints. One man whispered to another, "I wonder if she'll finally get voted off the board now that someone is actually standing up to her." I pretended not to hear. But inside I hoped they were right, because this community used to be friendly before she turned it into her personal kingdom. When the minivan was lifted onto the truck, Karen made one last desperate attempt, running up to me with her phone shoved in my face, filming me and shouting, "Everyone look at this lunatic, she's stealing our cars." I calmly replied, "I'm enforcing property rights. It's just like the law says. And if you keep harassing me, this video will go straight to the sheriff and the county HOA oversight board." She paused, clearly realizing that every second she kept talking was another piece of evidence against her. Finally, she stomped away toward her cabin, muttering threats, while the tow trucks drove off, leaving two empty spots that belonged to me. And for the first time in months, I felt the tension in my chest ease. Neighbors slowly approached one by one, saying things like, "You have no idea how many times we wanted to do that." And I told them it wasn't about revenge. It was about stopping bullies from thinking they could take whatever they wanted. By the way, what would you have done in my situation? Would you have called the tow company or tried to negotiate with people like that the moment the tow trucks disappeared? Down the narrow gravel road, the atmosphere in the community shifted. It felt as if an invisible weight had been lifted, and the neighbors who had been hiding behind their curtains suddenly stepped out into the sunlight. Some carried coffee mugs. Some held their phones, still recording, and for the first time, people actually started talking to each other openly about how long they had been dealing with Karen's power games. One older couple told me they had been fined 3 times for leaving a canoe by the water, even though the bylaws didn't forbid it, another neighbor said. Karen once tried to demand payment for trimming trees on his own land. These stories kept coming, and realized that almost everyone here had been living under her intimidation, yet nobody had pushed back because they didn't want to deal with the endless arguments, the fake legal threats, and the way she would show up at their doors yelling about community rules. I told them what had just happened wasn't about revenge. It was about setting boundaries and proving that bullies collapse when you document everything and use the law instead of fear. As we stood there talking, Karen's mother drove back in a borrowed pickup truck, clearly furious, and loudly announced that they would be calling an emergency HOA meeting to punish me. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because I finally understood how predictable they were. I calmly said, "Go ahead, I'll bring every neighbor here and all of their stories plus my video recordings, and we'll see who really gets punished." That comment made several people cheer quietly, which made Karen's mother storm away without another word. Later that evening, I sat on my porch watching the lake shimmer under the setting sun, feeling more at peace than I had in months, but also aware that this fight wasn't over. Bullies rarely back down after losing once. They usually come back louder, which made me wonder what their next move would be and whether the rest of the neighborhood would finally stand with me or retreat again into silence. Would your neighbors support you if you stood up to someone like this, or would they leave you to handle it alone? Asterisk.